Wow. Catherine, now it's your turn. You are going to tell us why my data can kill, although I have nothing to hide. It's a book by Andreas Eschbach, and it's health health data. You are a doctor MD, and you basically know what you're talking about. Yes, at least medically. So let's have a big hand and let's listen to her. I gotta talk a bit faster because I just lost 6 minutes. I am one of the large group of people that have no background in IT and bone neck down in background in technology. And most of my friends are like me. We're not really nerdy and technically versatile. So I'm going to talk about, and every time I talk about it, and we talk a little about this and about that. And every time after a certain time, you get this sentence, I've got nothing to hide. Why should I hide something? And I get pimples from that. And then I came across this book from Mr. Eschbach. I'm going to tell you about it. And now I get about 3 times as many pimples as before. And this is the reason why I'm here. And to tell you a little bit about it, I want to talk to you about this book. Maybe it's going to kill your mood a little bit, although it's such a beautiful day outside. And I want to tell you something about health data. Because I've been in research not looking how simple individuals are treated, but how the general situation of the population in a certain area is and how well they're supplied with health services. Yes, I can collect it. Let's talk about collecting data. I can collect some data, and then I take something from this data, it's information from this data. And when we listen to this closely and we take it seriously and look at it, we find out that this I have nothing to hide is a basically awfully stupid sentence. I've worked for the German health system. It's rather similar to the Austrian health system. And it's like yours. We don't have an e-card. We have a so-called health card. It's a credit card, but it's nothing, there's no storage of data on the card itself. But it works basically the same way. I go to the doctor, I can pay with the doctor, I can pay with the card. The doctor tells the health insurance why I've been here. I go to the pharmacy, I get my medicaments, and the pharmacy tells the health insurance as well, and then they know basically what size and what medicament I got. We had a database of 6 million insured people. Basically, the basic base data. We knew how old they were, which sex they had, and from the postcode, the stream is gone. Sorry, I have no sound. I have no sound. Repeat, no sound.
There is no sound.
There is no sound.
It seems like her headphone just went out.
I think her headphone just blew. I mean her mic. No, there's no problem upstream. Sorry, there is a little technical problem. I think the battery just went. Yeah, here she is again. Here she is again. Yeah, we stopped at the postcode. And there's a 5-digit postcode in Germany, and we have the first 3 digits we know. We know basically in which region they live. And if they have a smartphone, yes, we know 5 digits and the house and the street they live in. We know where they go to. Did they go to the local hospital? Did they go to the local doctor? What were the recipes they've got? What did the hospital do? I know TIGs, that's a special kind of data working where you regulate the payment in the hospital. And I also have the information how long he's been sick and when he was put back to work. And my job was to guarantee, excuse me, to ensure that these 6 million people give a random walk, but still proper representation of all 80 million German population. Of the majority is insured. So let's go to this figure here. Those are the illnesses that you have, like E, for instance, or I in this case is heart diseases. J is youth-related illnesses. But basically, we were in a good distribution. It looked like the real thing. So what did we do? Simple tasks, request. When somebody goes to a hospital, does he have the same kind of prescription medicament before and afterwards? Somebody goes to in the second quarter, and the first quarter, second quarter, and he has medicaments, it's this blue little thing, and then he goes to hospital, and he goes to he gets another recipe. Now you could ask, who the hell cares if Mrs. Smith has new medicaments ordered from the hospital? And no, there's not only Mrs. Smith, there are many Mrs. Smiths out there, and they all have a surrounding. And it's important what happens there. And I can, from this, I can take a lot of information. Were there new prescription rules? I can, for instance, look, were there new rules for prescriptions? When did they arrive at the hospital? When did they arrive at the doctors? Did the doctors follow? Did the hospitals follow? I can also look in which region it took longer to go through and which region was faster. I can also turn around and say, what kind of people got these new medicaments? I mean, there is discrimination also in medicine. Now we know if a medicament is more expensive, you give it to younger men because there's a bigger chance of it being useful. We know that doctors do this sometimes without realizing it, but they still do that. And then we can also check, maybe the rules say it's nice that you give this medicament to this group, but it should actually be to a completely different group. But I'm not a fan from data pooling, but these things tell us things that I think are positive, how medicaments are used and installed, and also the industry wants to know that. They of course know which hospital buys which medicaments, and they can check where they make. And I of course see what the others are doing.
And of course, I can say where does it take longer and what goes quicker. And you see which doctors work where it works faster. And so I can look at my employees at the pharmaceutical company, and tell them go there, and so they will get a bigger revenue. And if they're intelligent, they'll check on the social media and see, is the chief doctor over there, maybe they have a hobby or something. And then you approach them and talk a bit, well, yeah, you also like this or that hobby, and suddenly already you have a connection to the doctor, and then you tell them how great your drugs are. And then it's the question, so maybe you actually, influence them, and they will start treating people with your medicament or your drug instead of the others. So with this simple thing, I can get a lot of data about just by looking which drugs are used and which are not. And this is something we should keep in mind. It's not only the information, but just you have to look at the context as well and what can be combined and woven into this context. What you also see is costs. Of course, the German health system has to have a look on costs. So you can see if I use an alternative drug, which may be more expensive than the other one, what happens in that case? So usually, the goal should be that you want to have drugs that are as cheap as possible. And whenever you use an expensive drug, you have to check how those drugs are actually developing. So maybe the cheap drug has more side effects. So maybe people who get the cheaper drug actually have to come back to the hospital more often and get different illnesses, and they are ill more often. And so if you look at that, maybe the costs, if you look at the complete costs, the picture may be different, which drug is more expensive and which is cheaper. So one last thing before I start boring you too much. So about diabetes, this is a region where you can get a lot out of it because it's very complex. So there's a lot of research. And type 2 diabetes, people usually first they take drugs, and at some point they use insulin. And this is something people really think this is really bad because they think as soon as I get insulin, I'm really sick. And usually you get like 24 hours you have a little bit of insulin, which is done by body. And then when you eat certain food, you get more, and otherwise it will be less. But in medicine, you have different theories how you can change how this going from drugs to insulin. So how this transgression should take place. So there are people who actually eat sugar that they know just what they can eat and so how they can keep their sugar on a good level. But some people in the theory say, well, you should use a slow working insulin, which has this 24-hour period. Others say, well, no, you need to catch those peaks of the foods after each meal. So you should use it each meal, but it should be a quick working insulin. So we just sorted people according to those 3 groups. So people are on not all of them are at the same, are as often in a hospital. So you see in the middle column, there are much more people. So it's again something you can, derive other things from. So you can look at is there a gender thing? Is there something with age? So you also can correlate this data with other things. So what we did here is we looked backwards. We had a point time now, and then looked at all the data over the years. So can we find something else? We can do it differently. I try to tell you this on the next slides. So people with diabetes often have wounds on their feet which lead to necessity of amputation of those. So we have some thousands amputations in Germany every year. That's horrible for the people. It really destroys your life quality. But actually, we know that we could avoid a lot of those amputations when people are treated correctly. So we tried to look at can we just anticipate those developments and can we foresee how people are. So in this case, you see, we just made some milestones. What happens before people actually have to get an amputation? You see here like the diagnosis. Which different things they have, which problems, which illnesses, why they go to hospital. And of course, we looked at not only at amputation, but also we looked on other things like having, so how do people look like who will have or had an amputation, and how is the history of people who had wounds on their feet which maybe lead to an amputation, but they didn't get one. So do we see difference in the history of those people, like in the medical history? And so, of course, I, as a human being, can't just screen through 6 million people and check which patterns there are and which patterns are dangerous and which are not. So, and this is something we used episode mining or just machine learning so some employees of mine wrote programs and they found out, there's a special sequence of events which you always find with people who had an amputation and which is much more likely to appear for people that have amputation. So suddenly I can foresee and I can predict what people will have for problems. On the first slide, I showed that we tried to show that the population we looked on correlated with the whole of German populace. Because if the people we looked at is not representative, of course, then whatever your results are, they are not valid for the rest of, they will be distorted, they're not valid for the whole population. So the data quality is very important for the results of your studies. So when you look at California, most data they get is from young white males. So, but of course, young male white people are not necessarily the majority of the whole populace. So, and this leads to AI discriminating against other humans because it was just fed by wrong data or by not correct data. Of course, I could also say, I'll ignore people who are older than 60 years. The results would look totally different. But still, I could say, you see, this is what my AI found out, and this is how the data looks like. But the population I watched was just wrong or just not correct. And you can see the percentages at the right side. So these sequences are not equal to you'll get an amputation, just that the risk of getting an amputation are very high. And also I think this is something that people really don't do when they look at data and results from data, because they think this result means that for 100% each person which falls into this pattern will be this and that. But that's of course not true. It's just a risk. It's not an absolute truth. And the third thing, what do you think is, how do you predict cancer? What's the easiest way to predict cancer, the most usual way to predict cancer?
Basically, what is the most common denominator of cancer? So how could you predict, or any disease? What is something, if you have this and this, you are 100% cancer? Yeah. A cold. If you have a cold, you're going to get cancer, because everybody who has had a cancer got a cold before. That, of course, is bullshit. This is obviously not true. But if you can get there very quickly. This old situation. How about this, the storks and pregnancies and... Now, I always thought I knew everything about medicine. So I can look at this and say, no, this is true. No, this is not true. I may not believe immediately what data tells me, because if you do that, I will produce not only a lot of bullshit, but when I work in medical data, I will kill people, or I will harm them at least. And we have no control of... Now in China, we know everybody who survives, who's surveyed, and they had this Chinese actress, and suddenly she had an awfully negative score from one day to the other. She couldn't buy a plane ticket anymore. She couldn't rent a taxi, and that is because she crossed the roads. And the funny thing was, it was not her who crossed the street at red. It was her picture on the bus. And that, of course, went over at red, because it was red for crossing the street. And suddenly she couldn't buy a ticket anymore.
It's bullshit.
This is a good example. Don't believe everything your data tells you. You have to go back and check data integrity and ask if the relations that you are making are proper. Yes, there is something as a data analysis, but keep your common sense with you. Everything I've told you, there's a lot of good thing to be had from this, but there's of course a lot of hullabaloo to be had from it at the same time, and you have to use your own senses and don't give them up to be able to tell the difference. And data is the new gold, the new oil, the new capital. Data is the oil of the 21st century. Of course, in Germany as well. And yes, our card that we use as a health card should also store medical data. And last year in Leipzig at the Congress, we found out that all these data systems carrying health data have been hacked or have been proved hackable. And that is something I don't want. There were two German towns, Ingolstadt and Kempten, and their X-ray pictures of their local people were suddenly easily, freely accessible in the net. Actually, including of my mother-in-law. And that was something I would definitely not want. And it was basically just laziness. It was a lax handling of data. Somebody didn't give a hoot. Just look what happens. There's two big portals in Germany that talk about health, which I read regularly in the net. Do I have erectional dysfunctions or anything? All kind of thing. Do we make online tests? And of course, all this data goes over to the Great Pond, over to Facebook. That is like your doctor going to the street and putting up a big megaphone and saying, "Oh, Mr. Miller has erectional dysfunction," which is something you do not want to happen. The Red Cross of Bavaria, it's not a commercial system. Now, the webpage of the Bavarian Red Cross offers. You can check if you are capable of donating blood. And of course, if you have hepatitis, you can't. And somebody proved that this data can be taken off the website of the Bavarian Red Cross. And Facebook did exactly that. So Facebook knows how many Bavarians have hepatitis, whatever they do with that.
Or HIV.
Exactly, or whatever contagious you should not have if you donate blood.
Well, the developers of these apps, of course, they want their apps to be sold. So a lot of healthcare insurances actually supported those. But in September, suddenly, that's an American company, and all the data went to America, and the data is sold, and suddenly everyone was freaking out and said, that's not, of course. The developers said, that's not true. But yesterday we found out it is true. The Berlin's data protection officer said, that's true as well. So when I say I want that those healthcare data is on a good working healthcare, like e-card healthcare thing, that would be great. But you see, people are misusing this data already. And now we make a hard cut. And I want to talk about the book NSA by Andreas Eschbach. So there was a presentation from him at the ParivacyWeek already, and he talked about this book a bit. And I think this is a really great book. I'm not I don't get any money for him, but I think I already I just gifted it to different people. Always those people who told me I have nothing to hide, because it makes it really gets you in a bad mood, and it's about how would the Third Reich would have gone if they already had all the data we have today.
What would have been if the Kaiser Reich had portable telephones and a world net? And if it would have Facebook but the German book? And and every German would have a money card.
And they already started abolishing like cash, and you only have money cards. And so how would the Third Reich would have evolved if this were possible at that time? And I want to talk about this book, and I want to read out some passages of this. So at the end of the 19th century, they just created computers and invented computers. And already at the emperor's time, this NSA, which is National Security Amt, which is National Security Agency just in German. So that was founded, and they are just watching all the data traffic in this so-called world net, which is like the internet it would have been. But after Hitler took the power, it's pretty unclear what shall they do with this NSA, which already existed. And at the beginning, they just keep on working, and they are not integrated into the NS regime in that way. But in 1942, suddenly they started, to the Eastern Front, and Heinrich Himmler visits the NSA to check if they have something to, provide for him. And the NSA employees think, how can they convince Himmler that they are so important that they should, that they are important? And so they start, presenting some programs they have. And so they know you have this, they know how many people, how much food people buy,
receive.
And because you also know how many calories these are. So if you get like 1 pound of tomatoes and potatoes, and maybe you get some eggs or not, and so then you know how many eggs did you buy, and through like the central, and then they know where you will live and how many people live in this household. So you can very clearly calculate how many calories you usually eat, or how many calories per capita in one flat are used. And exactly this function is something they showed Himmler. So the NSA, this inventional NSA shows to Himmler all these things they know, and so they know on average people have this and that amount of calories. And if you know that, you also know how many people and which people regularly use more calories and on a regular basis. Of course, if it's just once, that may be like a family convention or just a party. But if I regularly get more, use more than I need, well, maybe if that's the case, I'm hiding other people in my household. And so they tell Himmler, well, you see, we can show this live to you. And Himmler said, well, okay, yeah, I would like to see in Amsterdam the live feed of this in Amsterdam. So they start running the programs. And at the end, they find 3 families which use significantly more calories than they actually need to. And one of those is a flat in the Prinsengracht 363, which looks suspicious. So Himmler calls there in Amsterdam. The SS went into this flat, and well, they find out, well, it's just an elderly couple and nothing else. Well, but the employees of the NSA are very irritated and say that's not true because their methods always work. So they're pretty afraid that they're sent to the Eastern Front. And suddenly one of them says, well, wait, what we can do is we could look at the
We can go and get the plans from the city
the flat and say
building office.
From the office, yeah. And they say, okay, well, we restart the razzia, and so we get again. And Himmler says, restart the razzia, and I want the SS officer at the phone, and I will lead them over the plans through the flat. And suddenly they find behind a big, they find a secret wall. And suddenly the SS calls again and say, well, and they found a family called Frank, and they arrested them. Which also, there's also a small girl or a young teenager, which also has a diary, and they're going to burn this diary. And then Himmler says, and this is a side. So I expected a useless rest of this wretched republic, but gentlemen, you managed to convince me. I see you're fighting at the frontier, actually. It seems to me the cruelty and sharpness of the data you have surpasses the one of steel by far. It assures me that from now on, no one will be safe from us, no one and nowhere. Our power will be absolute on a level never seen before. So this was a quote from the book. We translated it into English. And if you think about that, yeah, that's true. For today, that will be true. We know what people use on energy, how much water they use, and of course, by using the energy level people use, we can approximately see how much energy people use in a flat. And when we think about how much people are profiled now for personal tests or whatever, I'm sure that you can find out now which people would help other people. And those people will be surveilled particularly. I'm sure this is possible today. So for the end, what I want to say to you, if anyone tells you they have nothing to hide, and it's no problem that their data is shared with everyone, I can just say, well, look at this book. It's not every single person who has something to hide, but everyone, well, gives data to this benchmark, what normal looks like. And we yesterday had this talk about herd immunity. And when we all give our data, except for those who have something to hide, because maybe they're just journalists in countries where they're prosecuted and hunted, and we should. And if we give our data, we will not be able to save those people.
Them.
I'm sorry if you're in a bad mood now, but the book is really great, and I think, and it's very emotional actually, and you should make this clear to people.
Thank you for this very tight and closely knit presentation. Any questions? Everybody's completely. Who's thinking of never go sick anymore? Oh, several. Oh, here we are. One question. Oh, no. Tell me, you do that, you work with that every day. Last year you've had this change of life. Let me finish my question and then I'll take the question from the public. Where was the point when you started in your professional view of seeing these things like that?
Actually, professionally, I started doing this much more early because, that was always important. So how it can be ensured that how therapies work, how it can find the correct person for the correct therapy. So this is something I just started doing, I think 9 years ago, maybe 8 years ago. And that's the first time I started realizing what you can actually do with data. I don't know about those like SQL statements. That's nothing I can do. But what I try to create meaning for this data. And the interesting thing about the book is that you actually also have two groups there. You have like the program knitters, which are only women because they are assumedly know better how to write those statements. And then you have the analysts, which are only men, and they try to give meaning to the data. And I think we need both. But so we often forget that it's not just about getting data out, which is a part of the techies. But at the end, you have to interpret them because you can. You from any data you will get a lot that's like bullshit, but you just have to see for yourself with common sense what's correct. So there's everything that happens a lot. So and it's combined with everything actually.
Okay, here we have this question from the public. To your first part of your presentation. As far as I know, the pharma companies are trying to push their medicaments into the drawers of the hospitals. And I think the medicaments they give out to they're cheaper, and as a doctor I would not change the medicament just because it's cheaper somewhere else. Or did you take that into consideration in your job? Do you change medication just for financial reasons?
I don't agree. Whenever you have like new laws or something, or new new ideas about how you should treat sickness, until you get the old ways out, doesn't matter whether it's like hospitals or therapies or whatever. And a lot of changes are useful, like a therapy for like if you have a weak heart. You did something earlier which now is totally out, because it's about the symptoms and not really, makes your life better. And so if you have someone who has who still uses this old therapy, I will change the therapy, and I don't care why. I will if we have a better therapy and we know that the old one doesn't work, I will change it. But it's a long debate. We can talk about that for. But so under which conditions hospitals get which drugs, that's a long discussion. But I don't think so. I would never say that all doctors are like angels and only do what's good for patients. But most of them really try to find out what's right and good for patients, especially if you have people like you have to take 20 different types of drugs. So then usually they really think about what's good for them. and what's like the usual medicine, like high blood pressure, cardiac diseases, all this stuff. This is, yeah, you don't have targeted drugs, you just have generic drugs, which work more or less for everyone. And only for very expensive drugs, for special things, you have special drugs.
Especially for instance
Yeah.
in oncology.
Yeah, special for this person. And this is, of course, this is an ethical discussion, and that's something society has to do, and it's not my point. So.
Yeah. How did you get there to work? How did you, is there a formal formation that? How did you learn to do medical statistics? Or were you just thrown in?
I'd say the second. So I was thrown into cold water. I jumped into cold water. And within my studies, while I researched for my PhD thesis, and after my studies, I also worked close to some research. So I had the possibility, and I said, well, let's do it. And then we started trying, and at the beginning we were totally overwhelmed, what we all found. But then we started questioning our results. So it was a lot of learning by doing, and then we just published it in journals. But it's a great possibility in medicine to see not just what's in a hospital or what's in a research, but to see what's in 6 million people. So that's where I get a lot of data.
Do we have any more questions? Okay. Catherine, you okay? Going home tomorrow morning.
Yeah, we are.
So, Catherine will be still around. You got one. If anybody has a question that he doesn't want to ask in the stream or online, Catherine will be around, and we will continue in 10 minutes with Anne Roth and digital violence against women. Yeah, we're showing the nasty things in life, but this is one of our reasons to be here, to show not only agreeable things, but also the disagreeable things. So see you in 10 minutes or in 12 minutes at 4 p.m. in the next. Thank you.